Todd Beamer, Lisa Brosius, who would later marry Todd and become Lisa Beamer, and I were all students here at Wheaton at the end of the 1980s. They were sophomores when I was a senior, but I have no personal memories of them from that time. One thing that Todd, Lisa, and I all had in common, however, is that none of us could reliably sing on key. It is therefore a near certainty that we were together in this very room, adding our discordant notes to give thanks to God on high, the Wheaton hymn, which was first introduced in my freshman year in the celebration of the college's 125th anniversary. You have all been in the Beamer Center, but I imagine most of you know very little about Todd and Elisa Beamer, so I would like to fill out their lives for you a bit more. Lisa's father died when she was 15 years old. Her anger at God over this painful loss tested her faith severely. As she journeyed through this season of doubt and back toward a strong faith, Lisa drew particular strength from Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. That passage, if memory serves me correctly, was also my year's class verse. At Wheaton, Lisa was a business major, and she went on a service trip to Honduras through the Office of Christian Outreach. Todd was a proud Cubs fan and Traber 4 man. He too was a business major, and they met in their senior seminar. Lest this should heighten anyone's senior panic, however, I should also mention that at the time of their graduation, Lisa was engaged to someone else. And her romantic relationship with Todd did not begin until after Wheaton. As alumni, he phoned her up and asked if she wanted to go out to eat. Over pizza, she confessed to him that she liked country music. The part of their story that relates to 9/11 you probably already know. Traveling for his work, Todd was on United Airlines Flight 93, which was taken over by terrorists. He took a leading part in the group of passengers who bravely offered resistance. Lisa was at home with their 2 small boys. She was also 5 months pregnant with their daughter. Through the actions of Todd Beamer and other heroic passengers, the terrorists were unable to run the plane into a strategic site and thereby murder many more people. Instead, Flight 93 crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. Todd Beamer died on September 11, 2001, at the age of 32. Todd had many plans for the future, including, at the most mundane level of our quotidian life, a new diet that he was just about to start in the hopes of losing a few pounds. Our biblical text reminds us that we do not know the future. We make our plans, but we must not become arrogant and start to think that we have it in our power infallibly to ensure that they will come to fruition. Our life could vanish in a moment like a mist that hangs in the air precariously before being suddenly dispelled. Therefore, we ought to say instead, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. The company that Todd Beamer worked for was Oracle. But as often as we human beings have sought some oracle which would inform us of what the future holds, none of us can know for sure what events lay ahead of us in our daily lives. 9/11 serves to remind us that we are a mist that appears for a while and then vanishes. In our scriptural text, James is chiding us for the human tendency arrogantly to make plans without any awareness of the possibility of death. We try to keep the reality of mortality out of our thoughts. The young, in particular, like to imagine that death is something that only happens to people when they are old, or, at worst, only to those young people who have some terrible illness. But Todd Beamer was not old, and he was not sick. He was young, healthy, and athletic, full of energy and plans. It is truly fitting that our Student Center is named after Todd Beamer. It is an inspiring, worthy choice. I would like, however, to submit to you the thesis that what makes Todd Beamer so admirable, so worthy of honor and emulation, is not so much how he died as how he lived. His death simply put on display the faith, values, and character traits that he lived by in season and out of season every day of his life, as a Wheaton student, as a husband and father, and throughout as a follower of Jesus Christ. The German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer was also still in his 30s, healthy, energetic, and ambitious, when his life was abruptly snuffed out by the actions of evil men. Bonhoeffer also had plans for the future, ranging from books he intended to write to a woman named Maria, whom he hoped to marry. A few months before his death, Bonhoeffer wrote these words from his cell in a Nazi prison. It all depends on whether or not the fragment of our life reveals the plan and material of the whole. There are fragments which are only good to be thrown away, and others which are important for centuries to come because their fulfillment can only be a divine work. They are fragments of necessity. If our life, however remotely, reflects such a fragment, we shall not have to bewail our fragmentary life, but on the contrary, rejoice in it. Reflecting on the tragedy of 9/11 is an opportunity for us to ponder. If we were to die soon, what would the fragmentary life that we had lived look like? Of what would it speak? To what would it testify? I want to take this occasion to bear witness to a couple other classmates of mine as a Wheaton undergraduate. The first one is James Lagershalt. This year is not only the 10th anniversary of Todd Beamer's death, it is also the 20th anniversary of James's death. While all of you know the Beamer Center, at the very least, those of you who have been recipients will know of the James Robert Lagershalt Memorial Scholarship Fund. Still, I do not think I have heard anyone say his name in over a decade, and it does my soul good to say it now in this place. James died in a car crash 2 years after we were graduated. He wore clothes that he had bought for almost nothing in secondhand shops, and yet that often gave him a better look than anyone else in the room. James had a high-hearted love of life. I still sometimes laugh when I think of random bits of banter which I heard James roll out off the cuff over 20 years ago. I shall rehearse one incident for you. It might not make you laugh because it was probably one of those you had to be there moments, but I shall tell it all the same. It was at Wheaton's annual literature conference, being held right here in the East Wing of Edmond. As some of you may know, some English professors like to introduce all kinds of stray bits of theory and knowledge from other disciplines into their material because they're a bit insecure about the intellectual credibility of their own discipline. There you go. So this guest speaker went on and on about how physicists had discovered that a particle on one side of the universe corresponds to one on the other side of the universe, so they are reacting to one another and, as it were, are aware of one another, and one might say, in a literary sort of way, in conversation with each other. So on the break after we had sat through all that, James was fantasizing with a group of us about the question he would have liked to have asked in the Q&A. It went something like this. Yes, about the particles. Do they know that we know that they know? I had a crush on someone in our year. All of us were writing for Codon and all that. She thought about me for a while, but eventually decided that she liked James instead because he wrote better poetry than I did. Which I must admit was true. Still, they weren't even love poems. James was writing lyrical verse about Jesus calming the sea and other such biblical themes. A related side of James Lagershalt, no, more than that, the key to the whole, is that he loved God with a holy passion, with unembarrassed earnestness, and with unflinching dedication. He served with Wheaton's youth hostel ministry in Amsterdam. At the time that he, a healthy young man, was suddenly killed, James was preparing to go to China as a missionary. He was 23 years old. It was not in his power to say with certitude, "I will go to China and become a missionary." What was allowed to James, however, was to live a life that was a faithful fragment, which spoke of a magnificent whole. And though he is dead, yet he continues to speak. The other member of the class of 1989 I want to remember at this moment is Karen Lord. Karen and I went out on a few dates together when we were undergraduates. I don't have time right now to explain what dating is. But it was a pleasant custom, and I would commend its reintroduction into campus life. In my day, it often involved getting dressed up and going together to an event such as an arena theater play or an artist series concert or a restaurant in downtown Chicago. If you asked someone on a date, you were not declaring that you had decided that you wanted to start a romantic relationship with them. Let alone that God Almighty had personally told you that they were the one. You were simply implicitly making three holy and solemn promises. First, that you would try your best to be good company. Write these down if you need to. Second, that you would unfailingly treat them with respect. And third, that you would pay the bill. Every semester, the college union officially announced one weekend as TWERP weekend. TWERP stood for The Women Initiate Romantic Pursuits. And if you were a guy who did not have a date on TWERP weekend, you felt the lonely pain of neglect. I think one of my nights out with Karen was a TWERP date, and therefore she had asked me on that occasion. But it might be that my male vanity has invented that detail. Karen was smart and fascinating. She would wear high leather boots, which gave her an intriguing air of power. She always came off I'll wait for you, I'm in no hurry. She always came off as someone who had her act together and was going places. She also died in 2001, and thus it is the 10th anniversary of Karen Lord's death, as well as of Todd Beamer's. She died of cancer. She had been working for the Helsinki Committee, an organization devoted to ensuring religious rights around the world. Although she was fairly early into her career, her advocacy had already become rather high profile. In the influential circles in which she worked, her deep commitment to Jesus Christ was open, public, and widely known and commented upon. Her plans for the future were not realized, but Karen Lord lived every day, every year, in such a way that whenever she might die, the fragment of her life would glorify Christ through its manifest faithfulness. I realize that these people are just names for you. When I was an undergraduate, McCulley, Saint, and Elliott were likewise just names for me. One day in chapel, however, members of the class of 1949 who had returned for their 40th reunion spoke to us. For them, Ed McCulley and Jim Elliott were not merely names, nor did they think of them only as missionaries who had been slain at the age of 28. For they could also remember them as boisterous upperclassmen whose high-spirited antics all those decades ago could still make them smile. I'm reminded of Archibald MacLeish's poem, On a Memorial Stone. Now we are names who once were young and had our will of living weather, loved dark pines and the thin moon's feather, fought and endured our souls and flung our laughter to the ends of earth, and challenged heaven with our spacious mirth. A score or more of my Wheaton peers are now also dead. I have chosen to speak of James Lagershalt and Karen Lord, not because they lived better lives than all the others, but simply because I knew their lives better, and because the decennial anniversaries of their deaths also fall this year. Likewise, Todd Beamer is evoked here as a way of remembering the many people who died in the attacks on September 11, 2001, whose foreshortened lives also bore witness to a worthy whole. In all probability, the life of someone you know here at Wheaton College will be cut short, maybe soon. It is also possible that you yourself are the one whose life will end prematurely. Todd Beamer was a typical Wheaton overachiever. He made ambitious lists about what he wanted to accomplish. He went after his goals aggressively. He was continually tempted to invest so much of his time and energy into first his pursuit of a degree and then his career that relational and spiritual priorities might become a bit shortchanged. Hear once again the word of the Lord. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. We have no infallible oracle. We do not know how much longer we will live or what we will not be able to achieve in the time that remains to us. We can, however, see the good that Jesus Christ has given us to do right now, and by his grace, do the good works that God has prepared in advance for us to do. If we live that way day after day, in season and out of season, it will not matter when we die, for whenever it happens, the remembrance of us will be a blessing, and the fragment of our life will display a divine work. In conclusion, please stand for a blessing. May God himself, the God of peace, sanctify you through and through. May your whole spirit, soul, and body be kept blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. The one who calls you is faithful, and he will do it. Amen.